Hello, everybody. It is Kyla here from Nutritional Revolution, and I have joined by me sports nutritionist Kristen Dine, and Nia is here in the background taking notes. And we have an exciting guest for you guys today. We have doctorate in exercise physio from Penn State. I'm going to call him Dr. Wolf throughout this podcast. I think it's a pretty cool title, but he's also known as Tony Wolf as well. And he's actually doing some research as well at Penn State, bachelor's, master's, all of that, CSU, Fresno in exercise science. So he's definitely well-versed, but he also has his own coaching platform that he works with serious cyclists and some triathletes. So we're going to talk all things coaching, his athlete experience, maybe some of the research he's doing as well. So why don't we start first, Dr. Wolf, by letting us know, how did you get into this field of exercise physio? What kind of drove you down that road?
Yeah, that's a long story. So I actually was a motocross racer my whole life. I started racing motocross when I was 7 years old and was immediately hooked. Decided I was going to be a professional motocross racer. Found out you had to be 16 to turn pro. And I was like, okay, when I turn 16, I'm turning pro.
Wow.
Turned pro 3 months after I turned 16 and did that for 9 years.
Oh my goodness.
When I was 20, I broke my back in 7 places and had a 3-level fusion. And so during the recovery process, I was like, didn't know what else to do with my life and was just kind of went through a period of a lot of introspection. And finally, I was like, well, why don't I go into physical therapy? That makes sense. And so, which I think like so many athletes do that. They go into kinesiology during, college. And then So I switched majors the next week. Like I was a businessman. I was kind of like doing some business classes and I hated it. And so I dropped all my classes and I was like, okay, I'm going to kinesiology, and took some exercise physiology classes and just fell in love with that. And while I was doing my undergrad in exercise science, I got back to racing motocross. I recovered and everything.
Wow.
And used cycling a lot for cross training for motocross. And so it was all kind of intertwined, and decided to try some bike races and fell in love with that. And so it was a pretty easy transition. And so finished up my bachelor's degree and decided that I would actually prefer to go into research. And so I did my master's and then my Ph.D. and now
nice.
That's that.
And with the research stuff, can we talk about what kind of research are you doing?
Yeah, a lot. So our lab is we call it the Thermoregulatory and Microvascular Physiology Lab.
Oh, interesting.
So we're interested in the kind of historically, our lab is primarily interested in human thermoregulation, so the maintenance of heat balance and both during cold stress and heat stress. And we're interested in age-related differences in thermoregulation. But there are kind of 2 like subtopics under that umbrella, and one is hydration physiology. And the other one is microvascular physiology, so the function of the small blood vessels in the skin, which is an important component of thermoregulation. But it's also, we can use those small vessels in the skin kind of as a model circulation for overall vascular and cardiovascular health. And so we can look at various disease states or maladaptive states and try to figure out best interventions to mitigate the development of cardiovascular disease in different populations. So I've done kind of a lot of all of that, the microvascular physiology, hydration stuff. And right now, our kind of primary project is a 5-year NIH funded grant to look at the combinations of temperature and humidity above which core temperature can't be held constant, and so risk of heat-related illness starts to increase, particularly in vulnerable populations and older adults.
Wow. That's super interesting. So you said, so not specifically on athletes, but you said older population.
Yeah, most of what we do is more health related rather than with athletes. We did publish a paper last year in well-trained cyclists as a hydration study. We're testing a new commercially available beverage. It's called Good Sport.
Cool.
And we have another paper of that kind of testing forthcoming is more like recreationally active people. But other than that, yeah, most of our stuff is more health related.
Yeah. Can you tell us more about that study you did on cyclists? So were you testing that Good Sport product on them, or?
Yeah, so we were testing that and comparing it to Gatorade or water alone or no fluids. So subjects would cycle in the heat. We have 2 environmental chambers in our lab that are fully controllable. So they'd be riding in the chamber. I think it was 104 degrees Fahrenheit in the chamber.
Wow.
And so they'd cycle for about an hour to reach 2% dehydration, which is considered kind of that threshold for where performance starts to be impaired. And then they would rehydrate with one of those beverages or not rehydrate. And then after that, they would just kind of easy pedal for a half an hour to warm up and then do an all-out time trial. And then we're comparing that time trial performance among the beverages. And in that context, we actually found that there was no difference. So basically, Good Sport was comparable to Gatorade.
Yeah. Interesting.
Which I mean, Gatorade has been around for a really long time.
Yeah.
Lots of testing has been done over many decades. So that's kind of, in my opinion, the best that company could hope for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have not heard of Good Sport, but what is their like kind of angle or approach? Is it supposed to be kind of a higher
based?
Yeah, is it higher sugar
in there?
Yeah, it's actually a milk permeate based beverage. So when milk is processed, there's the kind of ultra filtrate that it's not ultimately included in the milk product. The permeate, which it kind of almost all the protein, like very trace amounts of protein are left in it. And it's mostly the carbohydrates and the electrolytes are retained. And so it's really a pretty good source of carbohydrate and electrolyte. And so they made this beverage using that kind of byproduct from the ultrafiltration of milk.
Are there any other similar products that do that on the market, or is that pretty unique?
Yeah, it's pretty unique. And I mean, it's smart. We have some friends and kind of colleagues in the UK who have done some hydration related research, and they did this beverage hydration index study and found that milk was actually really effective for just retaining fluids after consuming it. But obviously you wouldn't want to drink milk while you're in a bike race or something. It would, be disgusting and, and sticky. And so it's a smart concept to try to kind of harness those hydrating qualities of milk without the actual milk.
So interesting. Yeah, I've never heard of a milk permeate. Is it lactose free?
It's no, it's like really small amounts of galactose, I think really is what's contained. So initially it was thought that there was no issue with lactose, but it turns out that galactose does kind of have similar effects on anybody who's lactose intolerant. So it's not a good choice for those people.
Yeah, shoot.
And in our study, we actually up front we're like, let's just exclude anybody who's lactose intolerant just to be safe. And then it turned out we were right in doing that. So
yeah, you don't want anybody. And you were having them consume the beverage post a 60-minute session, you said, in the heat?
Yeah, so we're shooting for 2% dehydration, which every subject met in every trial.
Yeah.
Wow. So interesting. And in the kind of whole hydration research that you're doing, I know it's not necessarily on athletes, but have you found out anything in doing that research that you maybe want to see tested in athletes or think could be applicable to potentially any of the athletes you're coaching?
Not really. I mean, honestly, so the Gatorade Sports Science Institute,
Yeah.
they do so much work and really good research. Yeah. And the limited amount of hydration research that we've done, it's a lot of the stuff that we've done is more, it's not exercise. So kind of resting conditions. And so how do we, kind of beverages that are maybe better suited for older adults who are maybe, somewhat glucose intolerant or just don't need the added calories, stuff like that. So the performance related stuff we've done it's interesting and it's fun, but I don't think we've contributed nearly as much as some other folks have. So.
And in the microvascular side of your research, are you looking into, like, I know when I think about athletes and like beet products and the vasodilation effect, are you doing any of that kind of stuff with the elder?
No,
folks?
there are some people who are interested in, beetroot supplements. But there's been a lot of that kind of stuff on vascular endothelial function. My primary independent line of research is related to vitamin D status and vascular endothelial function, and particularly in those with more darkly pigmented skin.
Oh, interesting.
So, it's pretty well known that rates of cardiovascular disease and hypertension are highest among the Black population in the United States. And that's kind of the development of vascular dysfunction and hypertension and cardiovascular disease is multifactorial. But if we look at young, otherwise healthy Black individuals, they have reduced vascular function relative to more lightly pigmented people. They're kind of, age matched counterparts. And it's due at least in part to increased oxidative stress. But then a lot of people are doing research. They're like, okay, well, what if we just treat the oxidative stress? I'm like, I don't want to put a bandage on the issue. I want to figure out what is preceding the development of that oxidative stress. And it turned out that there are a lot of overlapping mechanisms there with vitamin D. So that was part of my dissertation. The last study of my dissertation, I proposed doing vitamin D supplementation study. And we found that vitamin D supplementation improved vascular function in those Black individuals. So there's no longer a difference relative to the more lightly pigmented subjects. And then have a paper under review right now where we looked at across a more widely pigmented cohort, very diverse cohort, to see if there was a direct relation between vitamin D status and vascular function, and found that there was.
Wow. That's super interesting. And what dosing were you having them use with vitamin D?
It was 2,000 IU per day for 4 weeks. And what was interesting is, so all but one of the Black subjects that I tested were vitamin D deficient.
Deficient at the beginning.
Oh, interesting.
Wow.
All but one was insufficient at the end. One got into the sufficient range, but all the other ones were still insufficient, but it still significantly improved their vascular function. So I'm submitting a NIH grant soon to continue that testing and do a larger dose and
awesome.
See what happens.
Yeah. I love the research side.
Info for like an easy, I mean, I'm not saying it's a fix, but it's just something so simple that people can do to prevent something that could potentially change their life forever. So
simple, cost effective, no real side effects.
Yeah. Super interesting. With regards to that, are you looking at all into potentially the difference between supplementation with vitamin D versus so many minutes or so of sun exposure, or?
That's
hard.
Yeah, I mean, right now we're just doing supplementation. The sun exposure is really hard to control.
Yeah.
And, I'm in Pennsylvania. So here in the Northeast, sun exposure, even during the summer, is oftentimes not strong enough to produce enough vitamin D in darkly pigmented skin. And I mean, in fact, a lot of the white people that I've tested are vitamin D insufficient and deficient.
Yeah.
There were only in the paper that I have under review right now, we tested 33 people. Only 6 of them were sufficient in vitamin D.
Wow.
Yeah.
When we do our nutrient analysis on clients, it's like vitamin D is the one thing that's always like across the board low, because it's also so hard to get from your food.
It's hard to get from food.
Yeah. So I could see that. That makes sense. Any other research studies, since this is such a cool conversation, but I love this area. Any other research stuff you want to share, or should we move on to your coaching experience?
Yeah, I guess the other main major project that we have going on is the one that I mentioned, where we're looking at those kind of upper limits for the maintenance of a stable core temperature. Our lab has done a lot of work looking at age-related differences in thermoregulatory mechanisms, but the big question is still, in what environments does that matter? At what point are they actually at increased risk? And can we identify those environments and then use those data to kind of so agencies, governmental agencies, whatever, can develop guidelines and policy decisions and triage for impending heat events and things of that nature to help mitigate heat-related risk in those who are the most vulnerable among us.
Yeah, interesting. And so is the kind of thought or approach is like, as we get older, our ability to vasodilate and like get the blood to the surface of the skin to create sweat and cool us and off that heat is delayed, or kind of the functioning breaks down?
Yeah, so sweating and cutaneous vasodilation are both, the magnitude of the responses are lower, and they're also delayed. So a greater rise in core temperature is required before you actually see those responses really kick in older adults. So yeah.
Are you separating males and females?
That's what I was going to ask.
We will. So I've published 2 papers over the past year looking at sex differences. Awesome. At different metabolic rates, really looking at those critical environmental limits at different metabolic rates, and whether there are sex differences. And it really largely depends on exercise intensity and whether the intensity is an absolute intensity or a relative intensity. So men typically have higher maximal aerobic capacity relative to women. So if they're working at the same absolute intensity, women are at a higher percentage of their VO2 max. So they're a little bit of a disadvantage there. But if they're matched for percentage of maximal aerobic capacity, then those differences are not there as much, and even at lower metabolic rates. If it's an absolute intensity, then there doesn't seem to be a difference.
Yeah, that is super interesting.
So actually, I think so at the same absolute intensity, women are at a disadvantage, but at the same relative intensity in warm, humid environments, women are actually at an advantage. But in hot, dry environments, there's no difference between the sexes.
That's so interesting. And is that for kind of like quick transitions to temperatures, not someone that's been maybe living in that environment and the seasons have been slowly getting warmer and warmer kind of situation, or?
Yes. So, I mean, it's in Pennsylvania again, so it's never really that hot here. We have a couple weeks a year where it really gets kind of hot.
Yeah.
But so a lot of them are not heat acclimated or acclimatized. And a lot of people, even when it is hot, they're staying indoors as much as possible. They're not really becoming heat acclimated anyway. So
yeah.
But certainly there are likely to be regional differences where if you live in a very, very hot environment, and especially if you're spending a lot of time outdoors, you're going to those environmental limits are going to be shifted upward.
Mm-hmm.
So are you, from that kind of research, are you looking into management of hydration if the temperature gets really hot, or is it more like prepping ahead of time and getting something like sauna exposure, a couple times a week?
We're not studying any interventions at this
Okay.
point. It's really just establishing those limits.
I see. Yeah.
Hydration. So the studies that we're doing last typically about 90 minutes to 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
So the subjects are dehydrating a little bit, but they're not becoming significantly dehydrated really. So that's not influencing their ability to thermoregulate in that short time period.
Yeah.
But certainly, especially in older adults or those with cardiovascular, either a weakening cardiovascular system or with overt cardiovascular disease, as you get hotter, the heart has to work harder to deliver that blood to the skin to be cooled.
Mm-hmm.
And if you become dehydrated, then you have lower blood volume, and so then your heart has to work even harder. And so that's when we have heat waves. I think last year in the Pacific Northwest, there was that major heat wave that nobody was really prepared for, and a lot of people died. And that's typically the cause of death. A lot of people think heat stroke, but really it's predominantly cardiovascular in nature, where people with weakened cardiovascular systems are having heart attacks or whatever, because of that heat stress and the physiological responses to that.
Huh. Wow. That is very interesting. It makes me think about my mother-in-law. She doesn't listen to podcasts, but it's our summer here, and I've been noticing she does not tolerate the heat well, like at all. I can tell, like, as she's getting older, it's just getting bad. And I tried to offer her electrolyte, and she looked at me like I was giving her cocaine. Like she's a little French lady, and she's like, no. So yeah, I'm watching that happen, I think, right now with my mother-in-law.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is such important research now that we're seeing these temps. I mean, I live in the Pacific Northwest, and now that you mentioned that, I remember it got to like 111 in Portland, which is, we're not used to that. Like we've never experienced that. So people just have no idea what to do and how it affects them. So that's great research.
Yeah, and that's happening in Europe. Like over the past week, that's been happening, and there's been tons of heat-related deaths over the past week.
Wow, yikes!
Really sad. So
doing some good work. Do you have any updated articles that are going to be published soon that we should keep our eyes peeled for? Or
yeah, I think we have 3 under review right now.
Awesome.
1 or 2 in press. So
all right.
Yeah, follow me on PubMed.
Perfect. We will do that. We can put that in the show notes too for people who want to follow you. All right. So kind of talking and shifting a little bit to your coaching world. Out of curiosity, one of my first questions I wanted to ask you is, when people come to you to get coaching assistance, do you find that there's a common theme among the athletes on something that maybe like consistently needs to be worked on?
I'm not sure. Not that I can really think of specifically. I mean, I'd say that the biggest common theme is the accountability is super important. That a lot of cyclists without that accountability will just kind of go out and do what they want to do for training. It's not really training if you're just kind of going out and doing what you want to do. It's riding a bike.
Yeah.
So I think that's the biggest thing, is just that structure and accountability.
Do you
I think with those type A cyclists, I mean, I coach runners, and like even more so than accountability, it's almost reining them in, and making sure that they're strategically taking rest days when they need to take them. And then the days that they go hard, they go hard.
Yeah.
But I see so many athletes train in that gray zone of like, zone 3 of just, they want to feel like they get a good workout, but it's just wasted energy, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that kind of, I think, goes both into, the accountability and the structures. Those are both there to make sure not only that you're doing what you need to do, like doing the work, but also doing the rest.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And yeah, I mean, that's kind of all built in there. And
Yeah.
you're exactly right that so many would just overtrain all the time if not for that structure.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I have a client that it comes to mind. He would just always go, no matter what zone was suggested, or he was going all out every session, every day. And I mean, the burnout happens quickly. So with kind of programming like that, giving them accountability, do you utilize like things like training peaks or that to work with your clients, or?
Yeah, so I use training peaks and also WKO5. So I mean, training peaks is all that's for them. That's all they're seeing is the training peak side of things.
Yeah.
WKO5 is for me to just do a little more in-depth analysis of their data.
Cool. And talking about data, I think on your website you mentioned like utilizing the science to assess the athletes and stuff. Do you do VO2 max or lactate testing, or what kind of stuff do you?
Yeah, I mean, in a perfect world, I would love to, but I coach people all over the world, so it's not really possible to do that.
Yeah.
So mostly no field testing, and so that's where WKO5 is really useful, is that we can model a power duration curve and try to estimate their threshold power the best that we can. But you need to really make sure to do the proper testing regularly to keep that power duration curve so it's as accurate as possible.
And do you have your like newly onboarded athletes go through any initial testing?
Yeah,
what does that look like?
Pretty much always the first step. So if they haven't done any maximal 20-minute efforts in the recent past, that's typically the first step for me. That's kind of traditionally used to establish functional threshold power. I think that has a lot of limitations just using that 20-minute power, because there are some people who are really good at doing 20-minute efforts and some people who are really bad at it. Some people, their 20-minute power is a high percentage of their 60-minute power. Some people it's a really low percent. So it's kind of like throwing a dart at a dartboard. But if we do more testing across a wider range of that power duration curve, if we do, one or maximal power efforts and some 1-minute efforts, and we can kind of construct a fairly accurate power duration curve and get a pretty good idea of where their kind of critical power should lie.
Nice. And are you ever doing or sending your athletes anywhere to get any sort of, like, I think of like sweat testing, or are you having them do any of that kind of stuff?
If they're getting ready to do a race in the heat where the hydration is really going to be a major concern, then I'll do again field testing.
Yeah.
Have them get a nude body mass, and then go out and do a 1 hour really hard ride that kind of approximates the intensity of a race, and then get another nude body mass and calculate sweat losses per hour, and then kind of figure out how many fluids they need to be consuming per hour during their goal event.
Awesome. Do you ever, like, I know the Gatorade patches are out now for sweat testing. What are your thoughts on those? Do you ever use them?
I haven't used them at all yet. I'm interested in trying them at some point, but Gatorade, they do really good work, and it's a woman who works there who actually did her PhD in our lab years before I got here, even. But very good researchers, and so I'm interested in it. I don't know how accurate it would be, but they definitely have the resources to produce kind of the best products out there for field testing, I'd say.
Yeah. So with the kind of accountability piece, like, do you find that there's like a sweet spot with frequency of checking in with your clients or updating the programming to help kind of keep them on track?
It depends. So I have different coaching options that I offer depending on the athlete. So some people don't really need a whole lot of contact. They need the program there, and as long as it's there, they'll stick to it.
Yeah.
To the T. There are others who need a lot more feedback and need a lot more communication, and so those options are there for those individuals to have a bit more communication with me to make sure that we're keeping them on the right track.
Nice.
Cycling is so cool now that there's, with the power meters, because you get so much data.
Yeah.
I love it. I miss that, coaching runners, I get some data, but not like cycling.
Yeah, power is really nice. I mean, it's always power is power. It doesn't change. Whereas heart rate, before power meters, heart rate was kind of the standard, and heart rate is so variable depending on.
Well, it depends on the weather and how
sleep.
Cyclists didn't get enough sleep the night before, so that's always hard. Yeah.
Just fatigue. If you've been training hard and you're fatigued, your heart rate might not get up as high as would be expected. And so, yeah, it's super variable. So power is really, really nice to have as just a constant.
Yeah. So do you encourage? I mean, I'm assuming at the level your cyclists are at, most of them use power.
Yeah, currently everybody I work with is using power. I have coached some people who are just using heart rate, but I typically, if they come to me, I tell them, if you're going to spend this much money on coaching, you should spend the money on a power meter. There are power meters out there that are, $700 for, if you get the dual-sided pedals, or you can get even $400, I think, for a single-sided pedal power meter, which is much better than nothing. So there are pretty affordable options out there now. Like I said, if you're going to be spending hundreds of dollars a month on coaching, you should get a power meter.
Yeah. Yeah. Plus it makes it more fun, training, and you hit those numbers.
Yeah. It's certainly a really much better metric to track progress. You can't track progress through heart rate because it stays the same. Like your threshold heart rate doesn't change, but your threshold power increases as you get more fit. So it's nice to be able to see the progress.
How often do you retest for FTP?
I don't have a set amount of time. It just kind of depends on what I'm seeing in the data. So if people are clearly going way over their interval, like the expected range that I would anticipate for a given type of intervals, if they're going over that power range regularly, then it's time to test. But especially like the 20-minute tests, I try to do it as infrequently as possible because it's miserable.
It's miserable. Yeah. Do you ever do the ramp test, or do you mainly do the 20-minute?
I try to stay away from the ramp test as much as possible. Yeah. I've done it occasionally for people that are doing purely indoor training, especially like in the winter in the Northeast, sort of, or if somebody comes on board with me during the winter and I'm like, let's just get an approximation of what your FTP, kind of get it in the ballpark for now. During the off season, we don't need to be quite as precise with prescribing intervals. So yeah, if just to kind of ballpark as we're getting started in the off season, I might use it occasionally because it's as miserable as a 20-minute power is outdoors. It's 1,000 times more miserable on the trainers. So
yeah.
So yeah, that's when I will use it occasionally, but I try to stay away from it if possible.
Can you tell from what you're seeing from the power and the Training Peaks kind of uploads if someone is overtraining?
Not necessarily. So I mean, I'll kind of watch their chronic training load, and there's the graphs they're useful. They're a tool that's useful, but it's far from perfect. So you can track their chronic training load and kind of the fatigue number and the training stress balance. And then I just encourage them to give a lot of feedback in their post-ride comments about how they feel. Yeah. Sometimes how they're sleeping, stuff like that. And if I get a few rides in a row where they're like, yeah, I'm not just the power's not there, I'm not feeling good, then I'll kind of start to ask them about other more qualitative things like, you know, sleep quality, work stress, stuff like that, to try to get a better picture of what's going on, and if we do need to dial it back a little bit for a while.
Yeah, that is a tricky area. I know. I mean, lab work stuff is starting to look into a little bit of that, but we see, I mean, I think even the definitions for like overtraining and all of that stuff is starting to become a little bit more clear now. And with regards to with like in combination with red S and stuff like that as well. This is just an interesting area to kind of look into. Are there any, go
I
ahead.
actually don't think I've ever overtrained a client.
That's good. That's good.
I think it's generally better to slightly undertrain. It's
Definitely.
absolutely better to slightly undertrain than to overtrain.
Yeah.
But I kind of err on the side of caution with that. So I've never actually had it be, I've certainly overreached clients, which is part of training. It's actually a component to building, but yeah, never actually overtrained anybody, I don't think.
Yeah, that's good. Are there any exciting races that you're helping athletes train for right now?
Yeah, I have a couple people who are racing Masters National Championships in Albuquerque.
Okay.
A couple of weeks, and I'm actually racing that myself.
Oh, fun. Awesome.
Kind of
That's a good segue. Start talking about your nutrition.
That's the closest, the most imminent event. I mean, the season, so elite national championships are already behind us, and a lot of the bigger races of the season are kind of behind us a little bit, but that's kind of the big focus right now for a few of my athletes.
Awesome. And so kind of on that note, for you personally, what does your nutrition look like during a training session right now, out of curiosity?
During training?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I typically eat Cliff products mostly. They're just my favorite, my preferred things, specifically the blocks and the shots. They're just, so during training, I don't rely on those quite as much. I'll eat also bars and stuff, but typically it's all just simple carb kind of things like that, right? During races, though, certainly the blocks and the shots for me, because they're just so easy to get down. Bars just, like I choke on them every time. I did Gravel Worlds in Nebraska last year. It's a 150-mile gravel race, and like 55 miles in, we're going down a hill, and there all of a sudden there's a sharp right turn that I was eating a bar going down this hill.
Oh no.
This is a great time to eat. And then all of a sudden there was a sharp right, and it went up a hill, and I had to shove the whole Cliff Bar in my mouth, and I was choking on granola.
Oh my gosh.
So,
shoot.
yeah, I mostly try to stay away from like granola bars.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Gravel's tough when you're going, you know, especially if you're in like a pace line in a gravel race, to like, I just, you know, I can eat pretty much anything on the road bike, but I get nervous, you know, like, I mean, you're just so focused, and it's hard. It's really hard. I've actually bonked in gravel races due to just not eating enough. And I was aware I wasn't eating enough, but I was scared.
Yeah.
Shoot.
Yeah, I mean, so that's definitely a thing in gravel racing, because if you're in a group that's, you know, everybody's close together, and it's a little more technical. But even on the road, it can be tough sometimes if you're in a really hard race where it's just constant attacks and surging, and it's oftentimes hard to anticipate when is a good time to eat. So it's best to just start eating as soon as possible and eat as frequently as possible.
Yeah. Are you seeing more of your athletes go to like calories in the bottle kind of situation, or are they using separate fueling?
It's all, I mean, there are a lot of people who use that, you know, like Hammer Nutrition has that kind of stuff that you just put in a bottle, like a flask or whatever. So there are a lot of people that use that, and a lot of people, you know, everybody just has their preferences, I think.
Yeah.
I think that the best thing, I just typically recommend to just practice it during training, figure out what works best for you. Yeah. Especially when you're riding hard, and then just use that in races.
Yeah. For your 150-mile gravel race that you did you do any carb loading leading up to that?
Yeah, lots of beer. No, yeah, yeah, a lot of, I can't remember exactly what I was eating, but yeah, a lot of carbs, pasta.
Yeah.
Stuff. Yeah.
What do you recall what kind of carb load you did? Like, was it a 1 day or a multi-day?
I think 3.
3 day. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a 8 hour race.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. The carb loading is something where the first time you program it for a client, it's like they are always like surprised by the numbers. Like, and it's always good to practice with it because they seem to always have a hard time like hitting the carb targets.
Yeah.
So it's
And
always
a
good
lot of times you do feel kind of gross,
Yeah.
you know, but then usually most of my athletes are happy on race day. If they eat normal the day before, you know, semi-normal, then usually they're okay on race day.
Yeah. So I've also done, you know, kind of a little bit of like depletion early in the week leading up to the carb load. Kind of upregulates glycogen synthase and so you really can onboard those carbs a little bit better. So I've done some of that, and then by the time I get to the carb load, also I'm just starving and, you know, like just ready. I'm also kind of a bigger guy. I'm 6'6" and around 200 pounds, so
yeah,
I'm pretty big for a cyclist, and so I'm usually like, I like to eat a lot, but I'm also trying to keep my weight down. So,
right.
so having the opportunity to eat a lot for 3 days is,
right. Yeah, win-win. That's great. Were there any nutrition kind of things you knew were kind of game changers for you throughout your cycling career that you maybe knew you needed to change or did change and saw a big benefit?
I think that the biggest thing that I've found works for me, and again, I think nutrition is so individual for people, just, you know, figuring out what really works for you. What works well for me is on easy days, I typically won't eat until lunch. And so, like, again, for me, it's like trying to limit how much I eat, because I will eat my face off all the time if I just let myself. So
yeah,
I'll do some time restricted feeding a little bit on easy days or off days, and then I'll eat more on actual hard days and on race days. So that's kind of what works for me. But I think other than that, it's really just pretty standard, you know, I'm pretty old school, I think, with my nutritional practices.
Yeah.
Like, you know, shoot for around 55 to 65% of my carbs from or calories from carbohydrates, and around 20% from protein, and the rest from fat is kind of, you know, how I was trained when I was coming up. And so that's kind of what I stick to, and it seems to work for me.
Yeah. Awesome.
Do you work with your athletes on nutrition usually, or?
A little bit. I'm not, so I always tell them I'm not a dietitian, I'm not a nutritionist. That's not my expertise. I have enough knowledge as it relates to performance that I can help them, but if they really want to, if they're not happy with their nutrition, they really want to dial it in, that somebody like you guys is a better bet.
Cool. We're happy to help. Let's see, what is your kind of like favorite go-to lunch and dinner look like?
Whatever my wife makes me.
That's a good answer.
All right.
Are you maybe it sounds really bad, but it's, I mean, completely, like, I always say beggars can't be choosers. So she's I'm eating it and I'm happy about it.
Awesome. That's great.
Yeah. I mean, I don't really have any preferences. I just like food.
What time of day do you normally train?
What time of day? Usually, typically evenings. I'm usually in the lab pretty early in the morning, so I typically can't train before evening.
Nice. Do you ever notice the evening training sessions affecting your ability to fall asleep?
No, not really. Not these days, anyway. I sleep pretty well.
That's good. Tired from all that research you're doing during the day.
Yeah, my days are pretty long.
Yeah, that's good.
By the time I'm in bed, I fall asleep in about 2 minutes.
That's good. That's good. Do you, out of curiosity, have any gadgets that you use on yourself? I know there's all the Garmin sleep stuff
The
and
Whoop.
Whoop and yeah.
Yeah, I used the Whoop for a little while, but I didn't find it super beneficial for me.
Yeah.
I think I've been doing it long enough. I am pretty well in tune with my body, and I just am pretty good at
Yeah.
just figuring things out, without any of that kind of technology. And I think I used it for a while, and you get the recovery score. And some of my best rides, I had the worst recovery score, and some of my worst rides, I had the best.
Yeah.
It never seemed consistent for me in that regard. I liked it for tracking my sleep, but at the same time, I think for a while for me, it got to where I was too concerned about what it was saying about my sleep.
Totally.
And I was just like, no, it's not really helping my training, and I don't think it's really helping my sleep.
Yeah.
Except just making me stressed out about not getting enough sleep. And so I just did away with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I started using it as well, and I noticed the same thing of like my recovery score really wasn't matching up to my performance for the day. And so then I'm like, well, this is great for sleep. I'm just going to use it for sleep. But I too would get like, oh my gosh, I only got that amount of sleep last night. I thought I slept more, but I guess I only got that much. Should I not train? So then it almost creates like high cortisol from, trying to figure this out.
Stressing out. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, Whoop. We are.
We're not sponsored.
We are not sponsored by Whoop,
yeah. Clearly.
I think it's fine for, so I have clients who use it, but I always advise them to take the data with a grain of salt to some extent. There are extra data that we can maybe look at kind of retrospectively if performance is not improving as expected, or if they're having some hard times with their training. And the other thing that I tell them is not to look at their recovery score before their workout for the day, because I certainly think there's like a placebo effect or like a nocebo effect where, if you like, oh, my recovery score is bad, I'm not gonna perform well, and you go into your workout already in that mindset, and that can certainly influence your performance. So
yeah, absolutely. Yes. I've experienced that with the Whoop as well. You're like disappointed, like Kristen said. You think you slept great. You're like, for sure, I'm going to be in the green. I did all these. Then the day before too, you're like doing all the checklist things. You're like, I'm going to stop eating so many hours before bed, and I'm going to hydrate, and I'm going to wear my blue blockers, and you do all the things, and then you're like, what? Yellow?
yeah, it's too much added stress that particularly beneficial, unless you can really let yourself take it with a grain of salt and just have the data to maybe look back on to explain trends.
Yeah, definitely. So I want to be mindful of your time here because we're getting close on the hour. So to kind of tie things up here, for yourself as an athlete, I know you mentioned your upcoming race, but are there any long-term goals in terms of like business research stuff or coaching that you have coming up?
For my, for my business, not really. I'm really happy with how it's going.
Awesome.
I have a pretty good handful of clients that have been pretty successful in their respective goals, and I don't know. I think I'm pretty happy with where it's at. Like I said, my primary job is doing research, and so that's kind of, this coaching is a passion for me, and it's it's an additional kind of job, but it's not really growing a business is not a huge focus for me. It's just clients come to me, or athletes come to me wanting to improve and having certain goals, and I'm happy to work with them, and that's kind of my business model, and I don't really see it changing too much in the near future.
Yeah. Awesome. Are you taking on any new clients at the moment?
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll link your website in the show notes for people too, so they can check you out. And then the PubMed stuff, we'll include that as well. Are there any other places people can find you we should mention?
Yeah, I mean, the website, atpcoaching.net, and I have Instagram, Dr. Tony Wolf, Dr. Tony Wolf, if you're interested in that. And also my ATP Coaching Instagram. It's just, I don't know, ATP_coaching maybe.
Okay, perfect. We'll include those in the show notes. We'll make sure those are right. And we'll include those in the show notes for everyone. And then if there's any articles and stuff like that that we discussed that are published that we can share too, whether that's maybe the cycling one or stuff like that, we'll include those. And I mean, I think we could have dove down the researcher rabbit hole probably much longer, but I want to be respectful of your time. So thank you so much for joining us today. This was excellent. And we appreciate all your knowledge. And yeah, hopefully, I mean, if you publish some more stuff too, I'd love to have you on here and talk about it and geek out.
Yeah, happy to come on and just talk about research anytime if that's what you want to do.
Awesome. All right.
Cheers.
Well, thank you, Tony.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Great.